Namaste, and good evening, everyone. We will get started with the sixth chapter today. So before that, I would like to just quickly summarize what we have been talking about. We had the second chapter, which talked about the whole summary of Bhagavad-Gita. Krishna giving a gist of what the Jnana Yoga is, of the knowledge of the self, and then Karma Yoga, and then introduced a little bit of a Bhakti aspect. So it was about the doing your work and being inspired with what you are doing and identifying with it, becoming one with what your thoughts are. In fact, all the work being directed towards the joys of the inner self. So identifying with the self is the ultimate objective of the wisdom of the Bhagavad-Gita. So we third chapter we looked at Karma Yoga in general, in the aspect of selfless application of work, starting with the importance of duty, and then going into the four fundamental types of attitudes: yajna, tyaga, samarpana, and prasada bhavas, or the attitude of cooperation, the attitude of dedication, attitude of sacrifice, and attitude of abundance. Then Krishna talked about the true aspect of leadership, or characteristics of true leaders, and also the pathway to success, which is of the focus being on the present, regrets of the past, of the future, and
I'm in a class kind of.
So then it is because we are talking about selfless activities, selfless action being Karma Yoga. How to control selfishness was also discussed in that chapter. Then the aspect of sacrifice, knowledge-based sacrifice, or sacrificing all your actions in knowledge, infiltrating your actions with knowledge is basically what the fourth chapter talked about, where he talked about avatars, the descent of the self, the descent of the infinite self into our bosom, so that it helps us to refine our vasanas, our intellect, mind, and the senses, sense control. So all those aspects, and then helping us move towards north, north meaning progress. Properties of nature were discussed in the fundamental properties of nature, of sattva, rajas, and tamogunas. And then he talked about attached actions and detached actions. So selflessness was defined as detached actions, when we actually detach ourselves from the eye on the results and then keep doing our work to the best of our abilities. How do you practice such detached actions? Through various sacrifices and an integration of the body, mind, and intellect, finally, was talked about, which is basically what fuels our effort into amplitudes that we never thought about. Disciplines of knowledge, outer disciplines of knowledge, as well as the inner disciplines of knowledge were discussed towards the end. And finally, there was an exhortation by Krishna to Arjuna to arise, awake, and act. That was the knowledge-based selfless action that is based on sacrifices. This the subject matter of the fourth chapter. And in the last week's session, we discussed about karma sannyasam, the renunciation of your the thirst for only the results of the actions. That is basically so. It started with selflessness and renunciation. Comparing selflessness and renunciation, selflessness is the action of being selfless, whereas renunciation is your ability to actually your mindset that helps you to disassociate yourself from the results, in the sense that it is not about shunning the results, but it is about not looking at the result or in advance. So selflessness is equal to renunciation. Ultimately, Krishna said, selflessness is nothing but renunciation. Ultimately, selflessness, acts of selflessness result in renunciation, and people can actually employ thoughtful engagement in actions to renounce things also. But Jnana Marga is maybe difficult for most people. So selflessness as Karma Yoga is basically what is the initial step that he prescribed. And this renunciation will lead you to self-limitlessness, infinitude. That is in rapport with the infinite self. You yourself realize the infinite self. And when you actually start seeing infinitude in yourself, you will automatically see infinitude everywhere and everywhere, in everyone. And therefore, unity in diversity is the vision that is bestowed upon you. And that is basically the path to peace and fulfillment. It's basically how the 5th chapter of on Karma Sannyasa was summarized. And now, therefore, taking a very very summarized look of things, you can see that the Bhagavad-Gita is talking about a situation when you are faced with challenges, difficulties. A summary of Gita wisdom is about putting in self-effort and working unattached and getting inspired in your actions by the infinite self. So that is basically the summary of Bhagavad Gita. And then Gita goes on to give us the details of, starting with law of work, unattached work. How do you unattached till you work? So that is being described in the first segment of Karma Yoga, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth chapters, including today's. But previously we have seen third, fourth, and fifth, summarizing the selfless work in the third chapter, then making knowledge sacrifices as part of the fourth chapter, and renouncing the ion results in the fifth chapter. So that is the summary of Bhagavad Gita or Gita intelligence so far up to this point. So work unattached, that is the focus of Karma Yoga, and we are continuing with that in the final chapter of Karma Pada, that is on the 6th chapter, the Dhyana Yoga. So before that, let us prepare the stage for Dhyana Yoga. Here it says, so far what we have seen is about preparing yourself for this dhyana, preparing yourself for this state of flow in your actions, in your life itself. Preparing and then fine-tuning that and ultimately perfecting it. Those are the 3 steps to take you to the state of perfection. That results in a state of flow in all your actions. So that is the fundamental pattern of sustainable success, you can see, that is prescribed by the Gita intelligence. It's not only about spirituality, it is also about your life in this world, life and living. Living, in the material world, life that sustains the dharma in your living. That is life. And so life and living, both integrated together. And that pattern for sustainable success is practice, acquire knowledge, renounce the results. Basically, that will take you to the state of flow. And we are going to look at that state of flow today. So the 6th chapter starts with the summarization of the whole thing again, about selfless actions and renunciation being equal. So renunciation and selfless action are equal. Selfless action is about, trying to work in this world selflessly with no likes and dislikes. And then ultimately you should reach the state of renunciation, which is what is detached action. You don't look at the results. You are not worried about the results. You have, first of all, you don't have control on the results, and therefore you don't worry about it. But at the same time, because you don't have any eye on the result, doesn't mean that you have to be actionless. That is inactive. That is not what Gita prescribes. You have to act in this world, do your work in this world to the best of your abilities without worrying about the results. This ultimately leads you to a state of equanimity, which is the state of inspiration, of mental equilibrium, intellectual equilibrium, and sense control. The intellectual equilibrium, equipoise, mental equilibrium, equanimity, and sense control. So these 3 are achieved, and that will take you to the state of flow. That is the basic summary. So the first and foremost requirement, Krishna says, is to have the fire. To have the fire to stick to renunciation. You should have that. We can talk about renunciation of the results. renunciation of the results of action and being selflessly engaged in action. But you should have that fire within yourself to actually stick to that path. It is about, just like, you know what is the path of good, you know what is the path of pleasure. You have differentiated that. Your intelligence, gross intelligence, has told you which is right and which is, but sticking to the path of good. Even by knowing people, there are lots of people who know what is good and what is pleasant, still go after the pleasures. That is not success. So you should have the what do you call the strength of will to pursue this path of good. So that is the fire that Krishna says is required within us. To renounce likes and dislikes, you should have that fire. If you don't have that fire, then you are lost. So for that, what is required? To have that fire, what is required is basically what Dhyana Yoga, initially addresses. And Krishna says that is self-direction. Self-direction. Self-direction is, this, it is not something that can be imposed upon you. It has to be from within. From within, that is self-direction. That details of that self-direction is basically what the subject matter of the sixth sloka. So that is the process that is discussed in sixth chapter. The process of actually directing yourself so that you can reach to a state of flow or a meditative state in existence, a meditative state in doing your duties in this world. And the term that is used is Udaret Atmanatmanam. You have to raise yourself by your own self. That is that process, raising yourself by your own self. For that, you need to have self-control, you need to have a peaceful mind, and therefore the mind has to be equanimous. And how do you do that? Through practice, persistence, and perseverance. 3 P's. Practice. Keep doing this. That is selfless karma yoga. Persisting with that continuously and ultimately persevering with your approach to life. And in summary, you can say that it is about applying restraint, discipline, and moderation in life. This is what we are going to see. So let us look at the process of what is happening. Typically, every one of us is like this. The BMI. I have put a circle around it, a bubble around it. That bubble is our ego. Within that ego, we are confined. We actually imprison ourselves into this bubble. And that prison is ego. That prison is the ego. And within that, we have the body, mind, and intellect entrapped with the propensity to go after pleasures of the senses, which is attribute of body, and having likes and dislikes, encouraging likes and dislikes, which is your intellect judging and making choices, and feelings of the emotional mind. So intellect, likes and dislikes, mind's feelings, and the senses pleasures. This is now making us entrapped, creating this ego that we all have. And what happens is we listen and respond to the senses and the mind. That is basically what is happening to us. We always work listening to our senses and the mind. They dictate whatever we do. We do not listen to the sound of self. We do not listen to the music of self. Instead, we look at the sound of the body, mind, and intellect. The cacophonous sound, the trumpets and the blaring horns, etc. of the Kauravas, instead of the conches of Panchapandavas and Sri Krishna, the self. And who is around the self actually supporting the Pandavas. So that's basically that conch sounds are missing. We don't hear that because we get lost in the noise of the blaring horns and trumpets and buffalo horns. And we listen and respond to senses and the sound. This is the typical picture of each one of us. So this is selfish, and those actions are selfish actions, or it is the state of distraction, state of distraction. So that's how Dhyana Yoga starts, describing the state of distraction. Now, instead of that, what is the state of actual meditative state? That is the state when the senses and the mind are silent. So instead of the ego engulfing us and we listening to and responding to the senses and mind, we listen to the self, choice of the self, inner calls, the conscience, and work in this world in an inspired fashion, not looking at the results, but by the powers that from within charges us. And then the senses and the mind become silent. The senses and the mind becoming silent is what is called as inspiration in action, or the state of flow, or the meditative state. So that is the fundamental definition of meditation, the state of meditation. Each one of us can go through this, provided we are able to actually practice the first three chapters of Karma Yoga, Jnana Karma Yoga, and Karma Sannyasa. When we do that incrementally and then constantly persist with it and practice with it, then we reach the state of silence from the senses and the mind. And that is the state of the self that we reach, which is the meditative state or the state of flow. So how do you do that? It is all about, knowledge of the self refines your intellect. So knowledge of the self, that is basically what we are trying to do through Gita Intelligence. We have been hearing about this self and the characteristics of the self and how actually that can inspire us. So understanding that, imbibing that, identifying with it, and the self, which is infinitude, is basically what refines your intellect. And the intellect is now infused with the subtle intellect, the wisdom of the self, so that the gross intellect actually takes subservient role and the subtle intellect takes charge, tells us, and therefore it controls the mind, and the mind is powered, which is powered by the self, focuses on the self. Mind, which is powered by the self, focus on the self. So what is this process of meditation? Meditation means the mind is focusing on the self. Meditation means the mind is focusing on the self. So constantly, when the mind is focusing on the self, your thoughts are accordingly, refined, and your actions in the world reflects accordingly. And this constant practice of pegging the mind on the self is what is called as meditative existence. So who is the meditator? Mind is the meditator. And what is mind meditating on? Mind is meditating on the self, infinite self. The meditator is the mind, and the meditated is the self, the infinite self. So this is basically what the Gita is prescribing for us to practice in daily life, when the silencing the mind and the intellect, and engulfing us with the music of the self, silencing the sounds of the senses and the mind, and engulfing us with the music of the self. That is meditation. So that is the very, 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 what we call as the technical and a very, detailed description of what is meditation. Now, this meditation is to be now mapped onto the our daily life. If we can map this onto the daily life and see the practical aspects of it, that is when the Dhyana Yoga becomes a kind of capsule for our success. If we can take that every, thrice every day, or, for few months together, it becomes our habit. So basically, Dhyana Yoga is being technically defined now, and now it is going to map this. We are going to map this onto practical aspects of life, which is basically what Krishna talked about. And he is trying to connect it with the karma sannyasa, and jnana karma, and karma sannyasa yogas, the 3 chapters previously. So let us look at that. So what he is talking about from 5th verse onwards, the first 5 verses is about self-direction. So from 6.5 to 6.9, he's talking about that. So how do you raise yourself by your own self? Because the mind and the intellect by themselves are meaningless, in the sense that they are lifeless. They are given life by the self. So therefore, when the mind is refined and starts thinking on the self, the process becomes the self raising the self. So that is Uddaret Atmanatmanam, that principle that is being developed, mentioned here. The self, infinite self, infinitude, Brahman is the self. And that self within us, it becomes manifested as self-effort. Physically, when it is tapped into our BMI, that spark from within which helps you to say, yes, come on, get up and do something, and then start doing something. That is self-effort. This is the self expressing through us. Self-effort, it can actually express through our mind in two ways, depending on how the mind is tuned. It is not self's responsibility. It is your mind's condition that is going to be now reflected. That's what we have been hearing. And so the mind can be in two modes. One is the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. I am translating that into modern terminologies which we use nowadays. So the fixed mindset is about, what is the fixed mindset? It is about BMI controlled mindset. In the sense that you have certain capabilities, I have certain strengths, I have some emotions now, and I have some ideas now. I am being controlled by that. My body, mind, and intellect's furniture. Ideas, emotions, and strengths of the current frame of mind, what we are, physical we are. That is fixed mindset. You work within that. You become agitated, you become emotional, you are driven by likes and dislikes, and therefore also driven by results. And you get, you get swayed in emotions between life and death. Janana, Marana, Samsara, that samsara sagar, that's the ocean of samsara. You get entrapped in this ocean of samsara, and that is stagnation, incompetence, and negativity, etc. is the result normally. Unsteady intellect and ruin, or average performances, mediocre performances, average performance, etc. results. But when you are powered, when the self-effort, when the self expressing it through us, manifesting through us, through a growth mindset, which is now what we have because of karma yoga, karma sannyasa, and jnana karma yoga, etc. Self-controlled, serene, equanimous, equipoised, and powered by the inner self, the knowledge of the self. And the result is progress, productivity, and positivity. 3 P's. And you become a visionary. You are expressing, or you are actually powered by unity in diversity. You are in a state of inspired work that is with steady intellect. So this is the path of steady intellect that ultimately we get into because of this state of raising the self by the self. And raising the self by the self, how can you do that? Uddaret Atmanam. Uddaret Atmanatmanam. How can you actually achieve this using the self-effort, raising your own self by the self? For that, I will post this chart. I mean, a diagram also as part of this thing, but I'm going to explain that in summary. There are 8 steps, simple steps to do that. 1, ideals to behavior. Behavior is the first thing. What you may have, you will talk about a lot of grand vision ideals, big value systems, and all those things. You talk about Bhagavad-Gita teaching us this, that, and many other things. That is the ideal that I have imbibed. I have got this knowledge, literal knowledge. Can I translate this literal knowledge into my thoughts and actions in this world? If you can do that, then you are actually raising yourself by the self. Then, are you able to differentiate the good and the pleasant? Every decision, every choice that you meet with, when you are about to take a decision in action, a decision to take some or make some choice and do something, whether it be at home, in society, or in workplaces. As a leader, if you're going to take some decisions that will affect your team and the people working under you, if you're going to make some very good, very prominent decisions for your organization, for your team, etc., think whether you are doing that for the good or the pleasant aspects of it, in the sense that, are you taking an easy route? Are you taking a route that is going to only help you? Are you going to take a route that only your team is going to be benefited and others are put away? Are you having that kind of a competition in your mind so that you think that, only your position is to take an advantage of it? So that kind of evaluation in taking any decision to make choices and differentiating what is selfish and what is unselfish. That is, what is good and what is pleasant. Selfishness is pleasant, pleasing, and brings in immediate results. Whereas selflessness or thinking for the larger good may not be easy, may not bring in immediate results, may not have immediate impact, but in the longer run that will be successful. If you identify that, and if you first you have to identify with it. And then the third step is stick to that path of good. You should have the fire within you to stick to that path of good. That's what Krishna talked about in the beginning. Then you should also have this mind to keep out the distractions in the first place itself, trying to avoid situations where you are actually embedded in selfish environments. Keeping out of distractions, even in simple things, you can actually start practicing that, in the sense of, suppose you want to, and I'm just giving you trivial examples also so that you will be able to immediately connect with it. That is, suppose you want to do some work in a focused manner, and that the messages that keep coming on your cell phone, etc., is going to disturb you. Then you can, if you can actually keep away the phone in some other room and then start working in isolation, in focus. So keeping away from distractions. So similarly, many things, satsangam is basically, satsang is basically about keeping distractions away. Then do not, the fourth thing, the fifth bullet is, do not degrade yourself. Do not ever degrade yourself. That is, you should not belittle yourself. Some other people belittling you is one thing, but you belittling yourself is the worst crime that you can commit. So never do that, is what Krishna says. You should have the strength of belief that you have the capabilities in it. It should not be bordering on ego and selfishness so that you become arrogant. That is not what Krishna is talking about. Krishna is talking about a belief in yourself and having the strength, belief in that strength that you can make changes and go ahead positively. That is actually the power of abundance. It is abundant thinking. Do not degrade yourself. Take ownership. Now, the next is to take ownership. That is, whatever the situation, whether it is success, failure, you have to take ownership. I mean, you own the thing, whatever it is. Even if somebody else asks you to do something, the moment you start doing it, it should be your own. And do it as if it is yours. So that kind of an attitude is going to make a big difference in the way you actually engage in actions. It happens in organizations, etc. Even if you are not the leader and you are working for the leadership, think like a leader. That will actually help you to, think. When you start thinking like a leader, there are lots of perspectives that you will develop. So do not degrade yourself and take ownership. The next, maintain a clean conscience. That is that don't take untruthful means as your means towards ends. Make sure that even for small things, however small it is, stick to the path of Dharma. And then your conscience will be clean. If the conscience is not clean, the self will not be able to express maximally out of your mind and intellect. So that mind and intellect, the conscience needs to be actually clean. And that means the mind should not be hampered by such negative thinking. And for that, you need to have a clean conscience. Ultimately, be rooted in the self. Be rooted in the knowledge of the self and the infinitude of the self and in the joys of the self, and not in the pleasures of the body, mind, and intellect. So these are the 8 steps with which you can keep your mind and intellect in such a situation that the self can express maximally out of it. That is how Udarayad Atmanam happens. And constantly, so if you are able to have these 8 bullets, prescriptions applied to your body, mind, and intellect, then you will gradually see that all your thoughts and actions are elevating yourself to a state of meditative existence. You can even for a simple, superficial level, meditation. When you talk about meditation, you always think about, sitting straight and closing your eyes in some positions or postures, and then closing your eyes, breathing, controlling your breath, and then, focusing your mind on something, and then slowly to nothing or whatever. We talk about that process. In fact, just imagine your mind or mind and intellect. When I say mind, it is mind and intellect both together. Mind is having having a flow somewhere in these 8 points. You will see that your meditation will never be effective. So unless and until all these 8 conditions are met, you are never going to be in a state of meditation. So if someone says that I am completely meditating myself, and then gets out of it and engages in action which flouts few of this or some of these points, 8 points here, that means his or her statement that I was meditating is not true. Because that is how the meditation requires your mind to be ready with these preparations, initial prerequisites for meditation. Okay, so the prerequisites for meditation also requires the preparation for it. And Krishna talks about this preparation in few slokas there. What are these preparations? I am actually, the description of this process is highlighted in a symbolic manner in the Upanishad, through the Upanishads. And invariably, we take it only as the previously mentioned, the superficial case of meditation. It is not. It is just got a very, very deep meaning, significance. Here is basically what that significance is. First and foremost, you should start looking at from the bottom. Intellectual steadiness is one of the fundamental requirements for you to be in a state of meditation. You have to be steady and firm. Your intellect has to be steady and firm. Moderate. At the same time, it has to be also moderate. Practical. And, given to extremes. Your judgments and your positions that you take and all should not be so tight that it can create issues. So it has to be, a moderate, midway condition. So that's something which comes by practice. Intellectual steadiness, that is called as intellectual steadiness. So sitting straight and 90 degrees to the horizontal plane, etc. all is described, which is about your intellect. Intellect has to be straight. And on top of the intellect, on top of such an intellect, is the dharma grass spread. What is that dharma grass that they are talking about? That Upanishad is talking about, it is mental cleanliness. Mental cleanliness implies some conditions of the mind, which is mind control, sense control, withdrawal, like a tortoise, forbearance, faith, and concentration. These are the samadhi, shirka, sambhati that the mind needs to be blessed with, so that you are able to pursue the path of truth. And that focus is basically what the dharma grass is. In fact, I will just quickly go through this poster on Guru, the teacher. There is one link. This is actually a poster on who is a guru. So I'm not going to go into the details. One of the link of this particular diagram, which is what I'm going to discuss now. We will discuss the rest of the stuff later when opportunity arises. Guru. A guru is somebody who should be approached by students who possesses. That is, this particular branch here is describing the qualifications of a student. Qualifications of the mind that is ready for acquiring knowledge. That is in general. You can classify that as 6. There are 4. That is Viveka, Vairagya, Samadhi, Shatka Sambhati, and Mumukshutvam. Okay, 4 things, 4 fundamental things. Okay, discrimination, dispassion, and then 6 mental factors: samadhi, shatka sambati, sama, adi, shatka sambati, mind control, sense control, withdrawal, forbearance, faith, and concentration, focus. And ultimately, mumukshutvam, that is your passion to break free from limitations, should also be there. So these are the 4 fundamental things, and out of which the mental condition is split again into 6, and that those 6 are the fagots with which you approach the guru for this yajna of knowledge. That is described in the Vedas. The fagots, the wood pieces that you put in the fire to burn, that is symbolically talked about. Fagots with which you approach the guru so that you can start the yajna of knowledge. The 6 things. So that it is exactly the same 6 things that is being talked about as the mental cleanliness that you have to achieve as a preparation for meditation, meditative state, engagement in thinking and actions in this world. And over this darbhagras, kushagras actually, or is actually spread a skin of a tiger. Okay. I mean, basically, the animal skin is spread over it. That animal skin represents the purity and cleanliness of the physical outside of each one of us. So we have the intellect, we have the mind, and the body. That is the body, outer physical cleanliness, which is the health, strength, vitality, and skills. All this should be there. Vitality, health, strength, etc. should be there. If you are weak and prone to diseases and some kind of pain here and there, you are not going to sit there and then be even in the superficial description of meditation, it is going to be difficult. So these 3 requirements: the first intellectual, then mental, and then the physical. And then comes the completely outer thing, which is you spread a clean cloth, white cloth on top of it. And that is the outer cleanliness that we are talking about. What is outer cleanliness? Outer cleanliness is the result of all your thoughts, the actions, your attitudes and actions in this world. They have to be clean, white, pure. So with all this, if you start doing this, that is meditation. Intellectual steadiness, mental cleanliness, physical cleanliness, and attitudes. Yajna, tyaga, samarpana, prasada bhavas, reflecting in your actions. And if you are constantly doing this, you are constantly in a state of meditation. That is what Krishna is, talking about in detail about what you should be doing. And this is exactly what the descriptions of these intellectual steadiness, mental cleanliness, etc. How do you do that? First, through selfless actions. Then knowledge-based sacrifices and renunciation. Karma yoga, jnana sannyasa yoga, and karma sannyasa yoga. That is basically described. Through this process, your actions in the outside world will reflect the karma yoga attitudes that we discussed in the 3rd chapter, which is yajna, tyaga, samrapana, prasada bhavas. So that if you can actually integrate all these teachings into our action plan, then we are automatically reaching a state of meditation, actionless inaction. That is the state of quiescence of the mind. The mind will be now fully focused on what you are doing, and it will be in a state of peace, peaceful engagement in actions. A state of peaceful engagement in actions is what meditation is all about. Through restraint, discipline, and moderation. Moderation in eating, moderation in sleep and rest, moderation in the execution of work, moderation in recreation, moderation in resting, etc. All this is, you need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to rest, you need to exert yourself, you need to recreate. So all this in moderation is basically what happens through this process. And that, in fact, all this is mentioned. This moderation in eating, sleeping, resting, exertion, and recreation are the result that happens is described in the verses from 6:11 to 6:10 to 6:15. About 6 verses. They describe this process. This description is given during that. And then 6:16 and 17 describes the food, sleep, work, moderation that is required for you to be in meditative state. Now, how do you practice? In summary, how do you practice? The preparation should be backed by a constant and persistent practice of refining the mind and the intellect. The qualities of mind and intellect that needs to be cultivated are listed as a summary in one word, which is talking about, Yunjida Sadatam Rakasi Sthida Egagi Chitatma Yata Nirashi Abharigraha. These are the words that Krishna has used, and they have listed it there. So the practice consists in setting your mind on the self, constantly working for the joys of the self only, rooted in the self. Be consistent in doing that. And always be inspired by the joys of the self only, not by the pleasures of the body, mind, and intellect. This will help you to be completely focused. Sthita prajna will be completely focused, and your mind is now one-pointed. It is on one point, single point. Egagi chittatma. Yata, always egagi chittatma. Egagi chittatma. So completely one-pointed, always one-pointed on that. What is that one point? Joys of the self. And not worried about the future, not anxious, nirashi, and altruistic, not hoarding or having no ego, abharigraha. So these are the conditions of your mind and intellect. And this is how you actually practice this regularly. How do you actually do that in practice? We have talked about in various, we talked a little bit about the practice karma yoga through eye focus and things like that in workplaces, etc., which you need to do constantly, and constant practice is required. The importance of constant practice and persistence is being described here. Why? That I will come to that. Why? Because okay, if you just let's look at the practical examples first. It is about as applied to individual, what happens is it is selfishness or restricted views about the goal. Selfishness, the goal for me, or restricted actually thinking that influence the nature of your actions. So through practice, you need to become fully focused on the joys of the self. Consistent, persistent practice. Self in all the joys of the self in all the actions. This makes your mind become one-pointed and fit for concentration. This repeated practicing of this, constantly thinking about what the selfless attitudes are, and then focusing your mind on the joys of the self and using that and applying that in day-to-day choice making and actions. Keep doing that. It becomes a habit. That practice is required. A team that is in the workplaces, etc. A team that is fully focused on the goal, on the team, on the product, on the organization, on the larger context, accomplishes the best objectives. If the team is pulled in different directions by selfish or personal interests of its members, then the productivity of the team suffers and the goals are not met. So that is basically, so it is about keeping your focus of the mind from not getting distracted from the reasons for difficulties or sorrows. And Krishna describes that as dukkha samyoga viyogam in 23rd verse. Dukkha samyoga viyogam. So meditation is nothing but dukkha samyoga viyogam. This is a practical summary of what we saw in the beginning of the self directing the mind and intellect, and the mind focusing on the self, and the Udaredatmanam process that we talked about, silencing the senses and the mind. That is the technical description. Now, the practical description of, or definition, or the definition, practical definition of dhyana is dukkha samyoga viyogam. Dukkam. All kinds of distractions are actually sorrows for you. Union with the sorrow. When our mind is in union with sorrow, you are completely distracted. So you have to get rid of your union with such distractions. That is dukkha samyoga viyogam. That is meditation. So please understand. So he says in 6:23, tam vidyad dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga sanchitam. Please understand that severance from this, or cutting away from the union with pain, is called union with the self. the identification with the bodily pleasures, emotions of the mind, and the ideas of the intellect, completely identifying with our own and being selfishly oriented towards it, leads to pleasures and pains of fleeting nature. It doesn't last long. But the union with the self takes you to perennial bliss, continued existence in that state of bliss. Thus, this union should be practiced with determination, and he says that with determination, persisting with it, and non-depressed heart. You should never fall, fall to failures. You should not think, suddenly, after giving up, there was some failure initially, don't give up. That is non-depressed heart. You sustain that, you persist with it. That persistence come into it. That is non-depressed heart in play. So if with this you should practice dukkha samyoga viyogam is basically what he is talking about. So it is, let us look at a small case study in practical meditation in our day-to-day living. Okay, let us say that you are in a state of distress, dejection, and depression. Or those are the extreme cases of sorrows. But most of us are afflicted with lesser amount, but still such distractions. So, what is the solution or the dharma yoga, the dhyana yoga prescription that Krishna talks about so far is this, practically mapping it into our working space. First step, be in the present. Do not look back. That's the first step. So for that, what are the things, details that we can go into? This is an analytical situation that I have come up with. Each one of you can actually look at this infographic in detail later on and try to apply this in your workplace or in your home, in your daily thinking, daily transactions in the world. So you are sad, you are distracted, you are depressed, or you are not confident about something. That is the situation. Okay, bring yourself to the present. Do not worry about of the past nor of the future, but be in the present. So you can then analyze, how am I behaving? What is not working? How can I self-manage? Can you start thinking about your current situation in this fashion? First step is that be in the present. Be in the present means it is about thinking about these things. How am I behaving? What am I doing? How am I reacting? What is not working? Where is it failing? How can I self-manage? How can I manage myself so that I can get rid of? Think about these aspects. And for that, a little bit more deeper analysis can be done, which is, how am I sensing and feeling? So you are now coming into your, from the infinitude, the infinitude is going to take control of your senses and the mind. So what am I sensing and what am I feeling? Now, can you think about that? That is, first thing, the question is, what is driving your distraction? What is driving your lack of confidence? What is driving your sorrows? That is basically what we are trying to address. How do I feel? What do I want, really? And what is going on? So for that, think like this. What drives me? What is it that I want? What is driving me? Or lack of awareness. What is your lack of awareness? Then also, why is it that you are feeling? Are you wanting to look good in the eyes of others? Is that what is actually pulling you back? Is it lack of skills, lack of knowledge, or is it some other insecurities that are driving you? Or is it some misplaced notions? Your own thinking, misplaced notions. Or is it some outdated themes that are driving you? Think about these various aspects. You can come up with your own list, but this analytics, is basically what you start thinking like that. And then, what should I do? What will be my reaction to it? What am I avoiding? Going back to habits, bad habits, etc., etc. This is when the self is now taking a grip on your mind and intellect. You are actually meditating. You are meditating, thinking about this. You just sit tight and then meditate. You are meditating to come out of it. Solutions to your problems. So Jnana Yoga is for that. In the aspect of Karma Yoga, you are in this world, this is how you practice it. And once you have done this analysis in your mind, the next step comes up. What are my choices? What next? What are my choices? So what steps can I take? What are the alternatives that I have? Once you have that choices and the alternatives that you can think about, then you have so many solutions to your problems. Which is the most productive one? Which is the most, you can analyze that, which is the most, which is, okay, I got three ways probably I can approach this situation. One, A, B, and C. And you can evaluate that. Which is more productive? Think about the options that you have. Which is more productive? And what are the concrete steps that you can make to take that productive path and then go about doing it? Even in that path, you may have one or two choices. You pick the one which you like the most, of the most productive option, and look at what are the benefits that you will get from that. Benefits in terms of larger good. Okay, it's not personal benefit that you are talking about. Of course, that is implied here. And how should I actually continue? What should be the first step that I should take to meet with these requirements? Analyze and come to that. And then intention, then fourth step of the self-effort, self-empowering your mind, intellect, analytically analyzing your situation, picking up the various options, and then choosing the most productive path. And then fourth one, intentionally pick the most productive of that which you have chosen. And you start, how am I reacting into it? Once you have fixed that particular solution and the path that you are going to take, you are now starting to do something. How am I reacting? Reflect and reinforce those thinking. Repeat and bolster the practice. Reflect and repeat is the final step that Krishna says. Reflect and repeat consistently without any reservations. Revel in the relief of the happiness that it gives you. Keep doing this. You can actually take one simple situation where you are having a problem and then try to do this process and try to solve it. Keep doing that, for all the problems that come up in the next 3 months. After 3 months, you'll be a completely different person. It is not something that can be achieved overnight, but keep doing this. Once you do that, there will be changes. This is practical meditation. This is constantly in all the situations of your life, challenges of your life where you have a problem. If you can sit, analyze, pick up the options and stick to it, consistently do it and make changes. That is meditative living. This is practical meditation that Krishna talks about. So he is applying all this process. Now, why? How does all these things work? In fact, let us take a brief look at the current, our knowledge of neuroscience. And we'll see why Krishna said this. Because all this, what is it doing? It is making changes within you, making changes within your mind, intellect, and the way you control the senses. So it is all within, changes within. The changes within mind and intellect, changes in your mind and intellect. What is it? Changes in your brain, physical brain. That is the physical device which has actually trapped the self, such that you become limited. And now you are using the same brain, the mind, to really understand your infinitude and then help that infinitude to help your mind to go to infinitude. That's what Gita is teaching us. That is what meditation is all about. And that is therefore what is happening. Your brain is getting changed. Isn't it? Every brain has this capability to change itself. That is the beauty of the device which with all of us are blessed with. And that process is called as neuroplasticity. Okay. Now, let us look at a brief look at the things that are happening within us. Okay, so I'm going to play a video. First, listen to that. The listening to that is not important, but look at the picture first, and then I will explain it once more without the sound also. Just look at this now. Okay, before going into that video, I'm going to explain that first. Okay, so I forgot that. Okay, so look at this diagram, which is infographic. This is an infographic that is shown here. The self. I'm again always starting with the self. The self is what is impinging on us, the brain and the cell, the physical BMI, the apparatus. And what happens, let's say, take a hypothetical situation. Okay, there are two things, two options: joys of the self, dharma, right attitudes, knowledge, thought, thinking, analytics, and renunciation. That is what our karma yoga said. Or at the bottom, pleasures of the body, mind, and intellect, wrong attitudes, ignorance, delusions, and attachment. Two things. Which path do you want to pick? Is one thing. You may want to pick this, correct? But many people, what happens is by force of habit goes into the other one. So that is, it's not in your control. So Krishna is telling you to take control of it. Self, Udaryat take control of it. Okay, now let's see what is happening. Suddenly, this path is so strong in our brain. Neurons and their dendrite connections are so strong in those negative habits that the self, when it powers, triggers your brain, it takes this path initially. What is that path? Path of sadness, shame, disgust, anger, fear, etc. of emotions. Basically, survival or fight or flee emotions take initially control us. This is how generally, this is because our brain is predominated by survival neurotransmitters or cortisol. Okay. Don't worry about the science, too much of the science, but those people who can appreciate it can I don't know. But the thing is that many people fall prey to the brain conditions that we fall into this survival mode or flight and flee situation. In a survival mode or flight and flee mode, you are not creative, you are not productive. You become average, mediocre. Now, what is required is you need to take the other path and reduce the strength of the negative part. You have to strengthen this path. That is also in your brain only, but you are so used to these situations that your brain looks like this. And therefore, you are prone to negativities. But you need to change that. You need to make the changes within your brain. Change the connections, the dendrite connections in your brain. Strengthen the other negative, positive abundance in your brain. Joys of the self, dharma, right attitudes, etc. You have to strengthen that. So that, which means that your brain will now be run by what is called as the mode of affiliation, or by some chemicals called as oxytocin, dopamine, noradrenaline, etc. These are all inner generated stuff. Cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine, all these are internally generated within us. The only thing is we need to invoke the best ones in more quantities. Then your world is going to be run by love, trust, joy, and excitement. That is the attachment emotions, affiliation emotions, etc. coming into play. So these are the two ways in which you are actually working on. When you are in the selfish mode, BMI directed, fixed mindset, selfish, focused on pressures, inclined to temptations, personal goal setting, fearing, ruffled and distressed, influenced by sense pleasures, motivated by the senses and the mind, attached to brooding, non-committal and vacillating, motivated purely by selfishness, and undecided, hope, despair swings, tenuous, brooding, regretful, anxious, agitated. These are the conditions that you are afflicted with because we are more used to that. Instead, the moment you start practicing the joys of the self, these attachment emotions, affiliation emotions, they spring up from nowhere, from within us. The self is actually powering that part of that kind of working of our physical apparatus. And what happens is we are actually run by self-direction, equipoise and equanimity, reflection, restrained discipline, moderation, focus. selfless, focused on the joys of the self, motivated by the joys of self, disinclined to temptations, not inclined to brooding, firmly committed to the goal, persistent with it, higher goal setting, motivated purely by sustainable goals, inclusive mindset, lofty ideals, fearless, firmly rooted in the subtle intellect, courageous conscience, roaming in that conviction, that is courageous conscience, peaceful, unagitated, non-agitating, equanimous, and equipoised. These are the results that accrue to us because of the predominance of oxytocin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. Predominance of cortisol is going to bring you into a different level. That is what, this is how the brain works. You need to control this. And that's basically what the process of Dhyana Yoga is talking to us about. So what you have to do is put the self-effort, self-direction, self-effort, push. First, keep pushing, gain momentum, kickstart, speed up, gain control, and cruise control. That is the kind of, that is push. First push. Push yourself to get started. Take the first step. The initial hurdles of doubt, distrust, diffidence, etc. Keep it aside and then take the first step. Gain slowly, take the second, third steps, etc. Gain momentum. Start small, then up the ante, taste success. Start getting small successes, happiness out of that, taking those, and confidence, etc. Kickstart, apply yourself again with confidence and faith, accelerator, put the accelerator on, gain control, and not only just going in speed, but take control also. It is a second nature, it becomes a second nature. That reveling in joy, you don't even think about the pleasures, the selfishness. Cruise, no effort needed. When in cruise control, at that point in time, after the fifth step, the sixth phase, cruise, no effort is needed. You will be subconsciously melding in the joys of the self. And subconsciously, you will be in that stage now. After that, if you keep practicing this, pushing, gaining momentum, kickstarting, speeding up, gaining control, and cruising, you will reach that state of cruise where the moment you want to take a choice, you will only automatically you will take this path without even thinking. Subconsciously, you will take this path. Just like, anything that you do, anything that you actually start doing, the first time you are thinking a lot and then making mistakes. But then keep doing that practice, persist with it, consistently do that. And ultimately, you will reach that state where it becomes your second nature. Similarly, any situation, even if you are challenged, even if you are in a very difficult situation, your brain will be positively generating this oxytocin, dopamine, etc., which is keeping your mind alive, active, kicking, positive, and abundantly thinking about options and various kinds of possibilities, and taking the best path out of it, and then going forward, surging ahead with that. Taking the first step, second step, third step, and accelerating, and then gaining control, and then finally cruising. This happens. This is not something that will happen in 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, maybe 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. If you practice regularly in all the situations in your life, slowly, any challenge comes to you, you will face it with a calm and peaceful mind, with a smile on your face, and go ahead. That becomes a habit. Your face will never reflect that kind of a situation. Some people, when you look at their face, they seem as if that the whole burden of this world is on their shoulders. Whereas some other people are always beaming, smiling, having a pleasant demeanor. You have seen these two types of people, isn't it? Why? The other one, even given difficult situations, their face is pleasant and happy. That is through consistent, persistent practice. You reach that situation. Whereas others, they look as if the whole world is in their shoulders, and therefore they have wrinkles on their face. All those conditions. You look at the face, you know that he is agitated, he is sorrowful. So that situation can be changed to this situation of oxytocin, dopamine, and noradrenaline. It is all chemistry that is happening place within our brain. This chemistry is controllable. You can also control that with medication, but don't do that. That only go to that if you have a medical problem, and then a psychiatrist will solve that. And for that, this meditation may not help for such people, because it is not a normal condition of the brain. But I am talking about 90% of the normal people. All of us have this capability of generating oxytocin, dopamine, and noradrenaline by our self-effort, within the self-generating it. It is possible. We can do that. And that is the process of meditation. That is the process of dhyana yoga. Dhyana yoga means, that is it in life. Dhyana yoga in life is about practicing to generate this attachment and affiliation emotions within us through the process of the feel-good neurotransmitters of oxytocin, dopamine, noradrenaline, instead of the feel-bad neurotransmitter cortisol dominating our minds. So this is the science behind this dhyana yoga. Let us see that. Let us see that. Okay, let us look at this. I'm going to play this video first, as I said.
Shuffle that kind of goes on microscopically between different circuits in your brain. You're trying to fire this new thought called compassion. But remember, you fired and wired all these other circuits based on the last 10 years. So as you're beginning to fire this new thought, all these other thoughts are saying, you hate your mother-in-law, you don't want to go to that dinner, why don't you start tomorrow? This isn't a good time to do this. But if you persist with a certain amount of amplitude, and you put your attention behind that thought, sooner or later, that thought will be the strongest and loudest voice in your head. Now, the moment that becomes the loudest voice in your head, the brain has to seal that circuit more permanently. So when the action potential is firing down the neuron from the presynaptic cleft to the postsynaptic cleft, there's a glue that seals the circuit called neural growth factor, and it travels in the opposite direction. But there's only a certain amount of that neural growth factor to go around. So it starts to steal the glue from the neighboring circuits. And when that happens, there goes your memory of your mother-in-law hurting your feelings 10 years ago. There goes the thought that you hate her. There goes the impatience. There goes the intolerance. And the only signal now that's traveling to that neuron is called compassion.
Okay. I hope you have you got a gist of what exactly it means. So I'm going to just describe that in a different way. Just look at this. Let us say that you are sitting and then trying to meditate on something. Okay, let's assume that you are sitting closed with closed eyes, and then trying to shut out all the sounds that impinge on your ears. Let's just hypothetically think about this. So if I am telling you, we will discuss this kind of a meditative practice, which will help the brain so that you can actually start getting more focus in your actions as part of the 9th chapter later on. But at the moment, I'll just introduce this because that is Dhyana Yoga, the knowledge of Dhyana Yoga. So you sit tight and then try to, in fact, let us do it. All of us, if you can sit straight and close your eyes and okay, just follow what I am talking about. Close your eyes. Listen to the sounds that you hear in your environment around you. And try to pick up the different sounds that come to you, different types of sounds that come to you. Spend 1 minute doing that. Okay. Now, can anyone of you volunteer to tell me the number of sounds that you heard just now in this 1 minute? The number of different types of sound that you heard. I'm sure it is not just one sound. In the real world, you can never have that kind of a thing. 4. Meera Ravindran says 4. 4 sounds she heard. Okay. So like that, I'm sure all of you would have heard 4, 3, 5, or whatever, different sounds. You did not have any strain. Why? Can you tell me why you did not have any strain? Or 5 or 6. Sankita Narayan says 5 or 6. Right. Okay. Now, you did not have any strain doing this. Why? Can you tell me why? Any one of you volunteer to say why? KV Surya Narayan says 5 sounds he heard. Okay. Why was there no strain in doing that? Any suggestive answers? Because it was easy, no? Easy to do that. Focus. Yes, Surya Narayan says because you are able to focus. Why? Why were you able to? My question is, why were you able to focus? Absolutely. Because you were already told by you to do it. No anxiety of getting it wrong or no anxiety of controlling it, isn't it? Your mind was free to roam about. The mind was free to roam about in its space. In fact, we are going to see this. Why Arjuna described the mind like that way towards the end. We'll come to that. But before that, yes, we were free to roam the space of our sound in a sound space. There was no restrictions. Now, I'm going to do some other thing. Now, let us again sit for 1 minute. And this time, again, initially just 10-15 seconds, focus on those same kind of sounds that are appearing. And then what you should do is pick one particular sound from among those 5 or 6 or 3 or whatever it is. Pick one sound that you want to choose. To let the mind ponder only on that or hook on to only that sound. So pick one and then let the mind hook on to that. And keep the mind on that sound only to the exclusion of the other sounds that are impinging on your ears. Can you try that? Okay, now what happened? Was your mind strained? Yes, your mind would have strained now. And were you able to actually do that? No. Anandji says no. Anyone was able to actually only focus on that to pick the sound? I don't think so. It is difficult. Okay. No, not fully. Yes, no, correct. So it is difficult. It is difficult. Yes, and why is it? Because you are the other sounds it will come in between, and then you will hear that, and then you will what you should do is actually you should still say, don't feel don't degrade yourself. Udaret Atmanatmanam. You heard that we talked about eight points. Many times what happens is we degrade ourselves. Oh, no, it is not possible. I cannot do it. That is it. I cannot do it. Who cannot do it? You are saying self cannot do it, but self is infinite. It is capable of doing it. So when you say I cannot do it, it is your mind telling you that my mind cannot do it. Correct? Your mind is telling you that you cannot do it. So mind is degrading itself. Not identifying with the self. That is degradation. That is what we are talking about. Just to connect with that eight items that we talked about of Uddhariyat Atmanatmanam. So don't degrade. It is how the mind is designed. It will go off to various things. So mind is doing its duty. That's all. Now, what can the mind do? One more thing mind can do. What is it? You will bring it back from that distraction and then again try to hook it onto the one sound that you have chosen. And you will keep hearing that sound, and then suddenly, again, what happens is, it will go again, it will come back, you bring it back, it will go again, it will bring it back. You keep doing that. Keep doing that. And over a period of time, I mean, not 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days, but maybe 10 days, on the 15th day or 20th day, what will happen is you will find that you are able to spend more time on that one sound than on the first day or the second day. Why? Because it is like, another analogy I will give you so you will understand that. Suppose you are going to, why do you want to go to a gym? People go to the gym to develop muscles. The people go to the gym and do weightlifting and things like that. What happens to, how do they do the weightlifting, for example, to strengthen your muscles in your hands? You actually lift some weights and then, put it down and wait, and, you keep tightening and flexing and then loosening the muscles. You will tighten the muscle and then you will loosen it. You will tighten the muscle and then you will loosen it. You will keep on tightening and loosening, tightening and loosening. That process of tightening and loosening the muscle cells, helps the muscle cells to develop. And therefore, it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So the ultimate aim for your muscle development is to gain or to become more and more strong. That is achieved through this process of tightening and relaxing, tightening and relaxing, tightening and relaxing, like the muscle cells. Neurons are also cells, exactly, similar to your biological cells, other biological cells. But functionally, there is a difference. That's all. We will not go into that now. So just like you develop the muscle strength, you have to develop the neuron strength. Neuron strength meaning your thought, the power of thought, mind, strength of your mind. How to do that? Tighten it, relax it. Tighten it, relax it. Keep on tightening and relaxing, tightening and relaxing. After some time, you will find that it is becoming more and more focused. Okay, it is a process that you have to go through. So getting distracted by other sounds is not bad, because the mind is like that. So let it go. Immediately bring it back, tighten it, and to one point. Try to keep it there for some time. Maybe 2 seconds, and then suddenly again the other sounds came. So you relax. Bring it back. Bring it back. After some time, you will find that you can spend more than 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 1 minute, and all in one point after some time, because it is strengthening. It is gaining in strength in focusing. This process is actually called as, we will talk about that at Ananya Chindanam. Ananya Chindayando Mam Yajanaha Paripasate Tesham Nitya Abhiyuktanam Yoga Kshemam Vahamiyaham. 9th chapter, we'll reach that point. Okay, so at the point, this is enough. So here on the screen, if you see, what is really helping us do this is this neuron growth factor. It's a gum-like substance that is generated within your brain. And this, when you are attempting to think, to listen to something, focusing on something, this neuron NGF is generated within your brain. It's a substance, chemical thing, and then it gets distributed to the various thought ways, thought paths, the paths of thinking that you have activated within your brain. So let's say some X milligrams of, the value is unimportant, X milligrams of neuron growth factor, this generated, is now getting distributed to 4 paths, 3 paths, or whatever, it is distributed. We are now practicing such that this NGF generated is going to go into only one path, just like as shown in the figure, so that the rest of the connections are deprived of this NGF. You are trying to slow, bring it back and then put it onto one thing. When you are doing that, the NGF is actually getting more and more focused in one thing. First day, second day, third day, and all, not much change, but slowly it starts changing. NGF starts getting focused and it starts getting connected to one pathway. Ultimately, the moment you think that I want to focus on this, the whole NGF goes into that. And the rest of the things becomes weaker, 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 and gets cut away. And your mind is now ready to focus. So this happens through practice, because there is a chemistry happening inside your brain. And you are now tuning the brain such that through this process of meditation, you are tuning the mind to gain the strength of focus, strength of muscles, like strength of focus. Just like the strength of the muscles, the strength is the output from the muscles, focus is the output from the mind. That strength you are now trying to help. This NGF it is for constant periodic surges of this production, and that only a little amount will be produced, and that will be focused on. It will need to be focused onto something. Then it can be optimal, and then after some time it will deplete, and then again it will generate. This process goes on. So we can use that process also to design certain things. Like, for example, your learning time periods, your focus activity periods, etc. We can. So that's a different subject matter which we will not discuss here at the moment. At the moment, we are focused on dhyana and the changes that it brings to your brain. So meditation can bring about a fundamental change in the way your brain works. And that's what I want to show you here. Okay, so that is the mind can be controlled by regular and persistent and consistent practice. How these changes take place because of that. That is what Krishna is talking about. Persistently, consistently do this. From whatever cause, the wavering and the unsteady mind wanders away. 6:26, 6th chapter, 26th verse. From whatever cause the wavering and unsteady mind wanders away, you should refrain and gently bring it back to control of the self. Keep doing this, repeatedly do this, and then you will find yourself merging in the happiness of the self. Always reveling in the joys of the self. Atma Radhi is your state of mind in such a situation. That is basically what Dhyana yoga is, constantly getting into this happiness of the self. Ramate, ramate iti ramyate. That Rama, the state of Rama, state of Sri Rama is, why that name Rama came? Because Rama is that state of the mind which is constantly reveling in the joys of the self. Rama. That is how Rama came out, the name Rama. So that is the state of Rama that we need to achieve. We need to do that through Dhyana Yoga, and we can actually exploit the physical device through which we have to do that. Through that physical device is the brain, controlling the brain through these practices. And what is the chemistry, the science behind it is basically what I discussed here. So, yado nischarati, that is what, from whatever cause the wavering and unsteady mind wanders, manas chanjalam astiram, and you should refrain and get to it. That is 6:26. That the process is described by Krishna, and then that's the same process that we just practiced, tried to do now, and the science that supports it, the nature that supports it. Nature is the product of the infinite. Infinity is expressing through nature, and that nature's exhibition of infinitude is exploited by us through this process, and that is what Gita is teaching us, how to actually tap the infinitude within our minds and be infinitude. That's the ultimate Bhagavad-Gita is teaching us. The infinitude. Tap that infinitude and become the infinitude. Simple. So what is Bhagavad-Gita? Bhagavad-Gita is all about infinitude. Tapping that infinitude and becoming infinitude. That's it. That is Bhagavad-Gita. If you tell me what is Bhagavad-Gita teaching you? Bhagavad-Gita is teaching you to realize the infinitude, tap the infinitude, and become the infinitude. That's it. Actually, you are. But our mind and intellect is making us forget this fact, and then we exist in a limited manner. Let us break free of that. Mumukshutvam. Be fired by this longing for infinitude. Mumukshutvam. That is moksha. That is moksha. Liberation. That we will see in the 18th chapter. Okay. So here, Krishna goes on to explain the situation a little bit more. 27, 28, 29, and 32, up to 32 verses, 30, 32, that 67 to 32 verses. It's talking about, normally what is happening is when the self is powering us, we are actually, our mind, intellect is, prone to dichotomies of life. What is the dichotomies of life? Two situations, likes, dislikes, sorrow, pain, etc. Failure, success, all those. These are the conditions. Any situation you take, either and then in that spectrum somewhere you will lie. Always. Sometimes extremes, sometimes in the middle somewhere, etc. Heat and cold, pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor. These are the conditions. Heat and cold, pleasure and pain of the body, mind, and intellect. of the body actually. Joy and sorrow of the mind, and honor and dishonor of intellect. In an intellect situation, judging and then deciding. So the same things, but in a different shades, afflicting the body, mind, and intellect. We are prone to subjectivity. And what happens? We either accept it or reject it. Likes and dislikes. We accept the likes, reject the dislikes. We accept the pleasures, happiness, pleasures. We reject the pain. We accept joy. We reject sorrows. We accept honor. We reject dishonor. How do we do this? Our situation in life will dictate that. Maybe we are a well-wisher, we are a friend, we are an enemy, indifferent, disliked, mediator, relative, saint, sinner. Any one of these situations we will be in everyday life. We will be in one of these kind of situations normally. And then in that situation, we will accept or reject based on the dichotomies of our life, the situation in which we are actually, engaged in. That is the general way in which all of us exist in this world and transact in this world. Krishna says, supreme happiness and bliss will come to you if you are able to balance this dichotomies of life and become objective with the power of the self driving you, accepting as things as they are, accepting as that everyone is, I am self, you are self, everyone is self, and therefore accept as they are. That situation is the balance situation that you are. Supreme bliss will come to you if you are driven by the joys of the self. Your mind is tranquil because it does not go after selfish ends, selfish desires, or are under any control. And you are free from the blemishes. With your mind steadfast on the joys of the self, free from all blemishes, you will attain ease. With ease, that infinitude bliss, infinitude of the infinite, the joys of the self. Being able to see the self in everything and all beings in the self. Everything, self in everything and all beings in the self. You will, abiding in that self, be able to see unity in diversity. He sees the self in everything, everywhere, sees everything in self. To him, self does not vanish. If you start seeing self everywhere, the self will always be there. Nor does he vanish for the self, nor does the self not see you. Both ways. Such a person is considered permanently dwelling in the self. Ramate. He can see the pleasure and pain of others on his own. Such a mind is like the Nandi bull. Such a mind is like the Nandi bull. If you visit any Shiva temple, you can see this Nandi temple sitting at the outside. Nandati Eva. That bull is always focused on one thing. The bull is focused on the idol. Always, you can see that the bull is placed such that it is always looking at the Sri Govil, that central shrine, and looking at the idol. So, your mind fully focused on the self. Always be like the Nandi bull. And that is the reason why you go to temples and then, touch the bull and then, prostrate before it. Because, actually, that is a physical thing that you are doing. But the moment you do that, internally, you should fire. The self should fire within you to tell you that always be focused like the Nandi. That is the message that we should carry. This is prayer. That is how you go to the temple and make the prayer effective. You see the symbols there and then you connect with it. Be like the Nandi that focuses on the idol and always, sitting there without any other different changes. So do that. So that is basically what will happen to you as a result of the state of flow that is achieved through this process of dhyana yoga. So that 632 is basically what he can see the pleasure and pain of others as his own. That is described there in 32, verse number 32. So, and then Arjuna says, at this point, Arjuna has an observation. So this is basically what I discussed previously. a meditative mind state is characterized by equanimity, but it is difficult to sustain. He's telling Krishna, why, yes, I understand that, but it is difficult to sustain. Why? Because of the restive mind. By its very nature, the mind is extremely restless, turbulent, very strong and unyielding, and therefore it is very difficult to control, just as it is difficult to restrain the wind. Just like it is very difficult to control a wind, it is difficult to control the mind. Krishna, therefore, what can I do? Because the mind is chanjalam, pramadi, alavat, dridam, nigraham, sudrisham, sudushkaram. Nigraham Sudushkaram, uncontrollable, Dridam, unyielding, Balavat, strong, Pramati, turbulent, Chanchalam, restless. So those are the qualities of mind. That is the reason why we actually had this problem when we start trying to control this through the effort required to focus it. Chanjalam hi manaha Krishna Pramadi Balavat Dridam. So that the qualities of this thing. And Arjuna actually, has got this the description of mind, and he is asking Krishna, therefore, what can I do? So now, why is it that happening? Krishna goes on and tells him to actually do regular practice, the persistence and consistency that we talked about, because the brain architecture is like that, and we have seen that the science behind it. Therefore, you have to beat that science. I mean, that's the way it works. The nature, beat the nature. Nature. It is nature actually that is creating this problem, isn't it? Just think about that. You should think about that. Maybe you can post your thoughts on it. It is nature that is creating this problem. Our chanjalam, all those things. Why? Nature. And nature, we have seen, we'll see more details later. It has initially been actually defined as sattva, rajas, tamo gunas. Sattva, rajas, tamo gunas. That is the fundamental quality of nature. So we have seen nature of the way the brain works, of this NGF getting generated and then, trying to focus here and there and all those things. Can you actually think about it and then identify the sattva, rajas and tamas in that process? That is going to be a beautiful exercise where you will understand this sattva, rajas, tamo gunas in action in that process of brain functioning. Because everything in nature has this sattva, rajas, and tamas. So this brain function also has sattva, rajas, tamo gunas. And that is the reason why it behaves the way it did in that demonstration. Can you identify that? Think about it. Okay, so now functionally, Krishna says, it is our identification, our justification, our condemnation, and our escapism that creates all problems. Our identification with our mind's thoughts without objectively looking at the reasons causes restlessness. You remember that process where you have to focus on the now and then think about why this is happening, that analytical process, practical meditation that we discussed some time back. That infographic I will post so you can reflect. And very often what happens is we actually take the negative roots and we try to justify our action. Arjuna did this in the first chapter. He said, I am not going to fight. And then he started justifying that, why he doesn't want to fight, through some kind of a subverted logic, which appeared good, but then it had problems. So justification. We justify with the identification. That is our problem. And therefore, our mind gets agitated. And we also condemn our mind. No, it's not possible. I cannot do this. All those things. And escapism. And then what we do? We escape from, try to escape from it. Or normally it happens. So identification, justification, condemnation, and escapism are the functional ways in which we actually defeat our mind. Causes for the restlessness of the mind. Therefore, Krishna says, this is the prescription that he says. 6-point prescription. Okay, in verses 40 to 45. Actually, 6 verses are there. 6 verses from 640 to 645. It talks about the ways in which you have to fight this. Strive. I just bullet pointed it. It is very self-explanatory, and the only question is about practicing it. Strive. You have to strive for what you want. When you say strive, it is not just daydreaming. It is about, setting the goal and then trying to work towards the goal, planning for it, breaking it up into pieces, and breaking up into smaller, targets, deadlines, and then try to meet that, and then measuring the success there, fine tuning, tweaking, and all those. That is striving. Then do good. Make sure that what you are doing is for the good of not only you, but for many others as possible. Have faith. Have faith in the strengths that you have. Have faith in the processes that you are following. Have strength in the belief that you are infinite and that you can make changes in your mind and intellect. Then fourth one is foster the environment for it. Satsanga, foster the environment. For simple, when you say foster the environment, I can give you some simple examples. Like, for example, our mind has got this habit of catching the cold. Catching cold, when you say catching the cold, catching cold is a very ubiquitous thing that happens in our lives, isn't it? Because it is something, a discomforting situation which happens very quickly, suddenly. For example, you go out with a few friends, or a couple of them, or one of them had a severe cold. You come back home and then you realize that you too have got the cold because you have got it so fast. Catching the cold. These negative things have this catching the cold situation. In the sense, for example, in the office, you go for tea, maybe at 4 o'clock in the evening or something, for a quick tea, and before you actually come back and then wind up your work in the next 1 hour. Maybe 3, you go for a coffee. And then in the coffee, for 10 minutes in the coffee break, 5 or 6 of you are having, and then naturally what happens is negative talk comes in. People talk about the bad things that happened in the office, or negative politics and all those things. And you come back. You do this every day. After a few days, you will see that your mind also is now in the contaminated mode. You also start complaining and doing things because you have caught the cold. So since you know that your mind will catch the cold, make sure that such companies are avoided. First step, foster the environment, good company. Try to, satsangate, nisangatvam, nisangate, nischalatatvam, nischalatate, jivan. That is why Adi Shankaracharya talked about that. That is something that you can practice this in our daily living. Foster the environment. This fostering the environment is also important because neuroscience says that brain changes. One of the factors that changes the brain is epigenetics, where the environment actually changes, helps to make the changes in your brain. Reinforce, keep doing things that are required to be done. Reinforce, repeatedly do that, and thus strengthen that strong pathways for this. So strive, do good, have faith, foster environment, reinforce, and strengthen. That is the process. Anything in your workplace, in your life, everywhere, think of situations and see how you can strive, do good, have faith, foster the environment, reinforce, and strengthen. That is the practical way. 6 verses of 40 to 45, 6 verses talk about this. Krishna says, yes, the brain, the mind is chanchalam, pramadi, balavat, dridam, nigraham, sudrushkaram. Fine, no problem. You have Krishna, Arjuna, you have this. You can do this, change this using this. Strive, do good, have faith, foster environment, reinforce, and strengthen. The solution. This is the process. That process, if you use, you can. And how can you actually apply this in the overall scheme of things? That is, with this, the chapter ends. So I'll just go and summarize up to the 6th chapter. Now, root out selfishness. Selfishness gives rise to identification. Selfishness is what makes you identified. And never brood over negatives or justify your wrongs. Justification. Never deprecate yourself. Don't belittle yourself. Have the belief and strength. Raise yourself by the self. Udarit atmanatmanam. Face weaknesses and errors. Face on. Weaknesses. Face it. Challenge it. Fight it. If you make errors, face it. Challenge. Face it and then take steps. Have the courage to rectify mistakes. How identify with the self, joys of the self, justify only righteousness, develop right perspectives on dharma. See posts on chapter 4. And know yourself, the power of the self. Understand. We are going to do that from next chapter onwards. We are going to understand the power of the self. from next onwards, next 7th onwards, we are going to do that. Develop a courageous conscience. See Postran chapter 4 again. And so that is the process that Krishna, talks about as, reflected in our studies so far, discussions so far. Meditative action is superior to mere action in renunciation. So if you look at the chapters, various chapters that we have seen now, 6 chapters, we talked about selfless action, knowledge-based selflessness, renunciation, and meditative flow. 4 things. So, and then Krishna concludes, meditative action in flow is superior to mere action in renunciation. Action in renunciation, not looking at the results and doing things is good. But much more than that, you have to elevate even that to a meditative state. It is superior to even knowledge-based actions. This meditative action is knowledge-based sacrifice. Superior to that is meditative action. Because, just by doing knowledge-based thing, what you get, if you add a meditative state also into it, then you will amplify it. You are a true perfectionist or striving for perfection. You don't have to be a perfectionist, but you can strive for perfection. Always incrementally keep on doing that. If you engage in life in a state of flow, in this focused state of mind, having renounced all proprietorship, that is I own, no, self, infinite, and you do the rest of your abilities as an instrument, is endowed with the knowledge of the self and is selfless to the core. So that is how he concludes. So you can see that the life within us, now to summarize the concepts, life, for the infinite as expressed as universal energies, which is basically what is giving us the life within us, and that empowers us with awareness and perception, consciousness. And awareness and perception brings in ideas, emotions, and skill sets in the body, in the intellect, mind, and the body, giving rise to thoughts, motivations, attitudes, aptitudes, dispassion, and focus, or fortitude and focus. The thoughts help you to analyze. Motivations help you to be intrinsically motivated, the supreme motivations, elevating the motivations to that level. Attitudes of cooperation, sacrifice, dedication, and acceptance. Aptitudes of creativity, productivity, profit, and dexterity that we talked about. Dispassion, or this fortitude of being able to identify the good with the pleasant and sticking to the good, the fire to stick to the good. And focus, finally, dhyana, your total identification with what is required. So this is actually the core. This is how, when I say core, that is our core. Who are you? This is me. That is it. And what is this? That is, let us look at that in a picture, in a visual, which will strike your heart, and then keep reflecting on that, thinking on that. Life expresses through you, your mind, ideas, emotions, and skills, going through and then activating all these things of your mind, which becomes your core. So what is that core? So what is the core that you are? It is that self, that life energy within us, which is that universal energies, which is that infinitude, the self. That is the self. The core is the self. So Atman, the characteristics of the Atman. The characteristics of the Atman is the characteristics of the life energy that is flooded everywhere in this universe, which is nothing but the manifestation of the infinitude, Brahman. So the Brahman is actually now expressing, manifesting as the universal powers that guide in everything in it, that lords over everything in it, the Ishvara. And that Ishvara is now expressing through within us as the Atman. What is that Atman? The Atman expressing, manifesting as the powers of analytics, the powers of intrinsic supreme motivations, as the Yajna Tyaga Samarpana Prasada Bhavas, the sacrifice, the creativity, productivity, profit, and dexterity, the functional ways in which it expresses to the best of the, everyone, and the fortitude of, being able to stick to the good, and being the power of the mind to focus on these things, power of the mind to focus on only these things. So this is the integrated power that is within us, and that within me, each one of us, and that is everyone's power. That is the self. So we get an idea about the overall process of patterns of success, which is about selflessness in motivations, attitudes, and aptitudes, plus dispassion, plus focus, constituting to refine our thoughts, the mind bit getting refined. So that every step is described here. The first, refined thoughts, refined analytics, gives you refined analytics. Then intrinsic motivations, selfless motivations, root of inspiration. Okay, right attitude. Then comes the 4 chapters that describe right attitudes, integrated aptitudes, dispassion, and focus. Karma yoga, karma jnana yoga, karma sannyasa, dhyana. So 4 chapters. So this is what karma yoga is, and this is what we have been seeing in the last 6 weeks. Now we will shift to the refinement process of the mind, the refined thoughts, refinement process. We have reached a state where refinement has set in, and that refinement is now to be powered by the actual knowledge of the self, so that the mind gets passionate about that self. We talked about so much of joys of the self in practical terms, how that has to be translated into our actions. Now we have to start loving that self. When you start really loving that self only, we will be able to actually focus our mind on the joys of the self as a habit. We have to therefore start loving the self. To start loving the self, you need to understand a little bit more about the self and then identify with it. That is what 7th, 8th, 9th chapters are going to be. And then 10th and 11th will supplement that with some practical knowledge. And ultimately, then Krishna will summarize the whole process of this passion for self or devotion, bhakti yoga, in the 12th chapter. So that is the next 6 chapters, which we will be discussing in the next 6 weeks. Okay, so I think I will summarize this whole chapter. That what we saw here, we talked about the self and the mind, powering the mind and the mind focusing on the self as the meditative process, and then giving you that inspired state of action to flow, then putting in that self-effort into the growth mindset by Udaredatmanam, idealistic behavior, good versus pleasant, etc. That is self-direction, giving you equanimity and quiescence or peace of mind. And the preparation for it through the firm, the intellect, mental cleanliness, physical cleanliness, and outer cleanliness, and the practice of constantly being rooted on the self. Yunjida sadadam rahasi sthida ekagijit atma nirashi and abhirigraha status of the mind to be focused on the self. This is particularly the process of getting into flow, the preparation and the practice of getting into flow from 6:10 to 6:17, and then we add the how that state of flow, what benefits do you accrue because of that through the process of dukkha samyoga viyogam, taking away from the sorrows and focusing on the self and realizing the self and getting this complete faith that the self is everything, self is everywhere. If we are all in self, each one of us is self because it is infinite and everything is in self. Then the practice results in state of flow. Then there was a discussion about the nature of the mind, balavat, sudrisham, dushkaram, suvigraham, and all those things. The qualities Arjuna talked about, the nature of the mind, and how actually the process of getting into flow through practice, success is ensured. Strive to do good, have faith, foster the environment, reinforce and strengthen. Through that process, let us all get into that state of identification, which is the meditative state. That is basically what the 6th chapter is all about. Okay, so that is a summary. So I will stop with this now before we enter into the discussion mode. Okay, that's it for today. Before ending, Anandji, your words of wisdom.
See, actually, what Krishna wants to say here, the most important thing in our body is the mind. Without controlling the mind, we cannot achieve anything in this life. We have to take ownership, as you rightly said, we are responsible for our own success. We are only responsible for our own failure. There is no need to blame anybody for our failure. But we always say, others are wrong. I did it because of somebody else did it, without knowing the power of the mind.
Right.
That is, when you said about the environment, see, we always like to hear something bad about others, or talk about others.
Yes.
I remember one small incident. I will stop with that. When somebody went to Aristotle, he said, "Sir, I want to talk to you something very, very interesting." And he says, "Oh, you want to talk to me something interesting? Is it beneficial to me?" He says, No, it is not beneficial to you." Is it beneficial to you? He says, No, it is not beneficial to you either, to me either. He says, "Is it beneficial to anyone?" He says, No, it is not beneficial to you. Please don't talk to me, on this. I'm not interested to hear. So if you can develop that kind of mind, then our circumstances, can control. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Anandji. Is there if anyone has got any thing to discuss, please. Otherwise, we'll wind up. If there is nothing to discuss, we'll wind up.